Yeah, so thank you very much for that very kind introduction. I should be the one thanking all of you. I'm extremely happy to be back at AUC. It brings back many, many memories of the profession. As well as takes me back to my own academic years. To be back on this occasion, frankly, is also of special importance to me. To be asked to speak about foreign policy at the Nadia Younes Memorial event is something that I think is very opportune. It's the kind of issues, it's the kind of occasion where I'd like to speak about foreign policy. That's also the kind of issue that was very close to Nadia and her commitment to international affairs and public life. But it's also because Nadia was a close friend of mine. And she was an interesting mix of a very strong determination and seriousness in her work and an extremely light-hearted sense of humor that would always catch you off guard, and you had a very serious event, you still have the ability to sort of joke around about what you didn't do or what she didn't do, frankly. So it was always a lot of fun to work with her, and it was always something we could be proud of as Egyptians to see how she operated in the international community, and I want to thank her family for this consideration. Much has changed since Nadia was tragically killed while serving as part of the UN delegation in Baghdad. In those 10 years, the Middle East has changed, the global context has changed, and of course, Egypt has changed. It has changed profoundly. It is these challenges, these changes, that I would like to raise with you and take as my point of departure in my talk this evening. As I address Egypt's foreign policy, the factor of having to work in a changing environment, it will be predominant in not only how we develop our policy, but also the policy that we choose. After two popular revolutions, the ouster of two presidents, the turnover of no less than 6 governments in 3 years, a failed experiment in political Islam and a political process that has thrown into seemingly constant state of flux, there can be no doubt that we are indeed witnessing the birth of a new Egypt that will have to, and that we will have to go through a number of spasms as we get to the end of that process. But it is a process that I'm confident will make a better Egypt. The Egypt of today boasts a population of 90 million. According to the current demographic trends, by the year 2030, we should be at about 100 million. A look at Egypt's economic realities demonstrate the sheer scale of the challenges that we will be facing. Today, 750,000 new jobs need to be created annually. That makes for an unemployment rate of 13%, with the youth unemployment rate of 25 to 30%. Just absorbing the new entrants in the labor force will require sustained growth of 6 to 7% at least. Reducing unemployment to below 10% will require our economy to grow at 8% continuously for the next decade at least. The challenge is magnified once we begin to factor in Egypt's future resource requirements. As a net importer of food, water, energy, and capital, Egypt will face a widening gap between resource demand and domestic supply. To secure its growing needs, Egypt will increasingly be looking abroad. To be certain, much needed domestic reforms to increase efficiency and rationalize energy consumption will lessen Egypt's external resource dependence. The challenge, however, will be to enact these reforms in a democratic setting, one that still resonates with revolutionary fervor. Governments will be required to build a political consensus for difficult policy decisions. Egyptians will make sacrifices if their expectations for transparency and accountability are met, and the fruits of reform are distributed more equitably. This then will be the outlook for the new Egypt, a country whose future will be driven increasingly by the absolute imperative of sustained economic growth, increased resource and demographic pressures, and all of this against the backdrop of greater pluralism and political openness. It is in this context that Egypt's foreign policy will be determined, and it will be critical in realizing the promise of the revolutions for the future. if I were to be asked, what would be the overriding strategic objective for Egypt's future foreign policy, I would venture to say it is to provide an enabling environment for the attainment of Egypt's future economic needs and political priorities. This is not to imply that Egypt will pursue a minimalist foreign policy or one solely focused on its economic paradigm. Quite the contrary. The aspirations unleashed by revolutions require, indeed necessitate, an activist foreign policy, one that regains and even exceeds its historic leadership role, regionally and internationally, fostered globally. A revitalization of Egypt's trade diplomacy will be a top priority to forge economic partnerships, secure new markets, and to sustain Egypt's economic future. Food, energy, and water security will increasingly dominate Egypt's foreign policy agenda in a context in which resource politics are being increasingly globalized. More importantly, Egypt will need to shape its regional environment to allow its democracy to mature, free from the scourge of extremism and menacing sectarianism, which threatens the regional fabric, the danger of terrorism, and the chronic instability that stems from the Middle East's perennial conflicts. Egypt's leadership role is therefore neither a matter of choice it can decide to abandon, nor merely a source of national pride as the luxury to forego. It is an imperative born of the exigencies of history, geography, and most importantly, the yearnings for a better future, one in which those aspirations at home are intertwined with Egypt's interests abroad. However, if these are the parameters that frame Egypt's future foreign policy, ladies and gentlemen, the conduct of foreign policy and your assessment of it must be grounded in recognition that it unfolds in the context of profound regional and global transformation that pose formidable challenges that also hold bold opportunities. Globally, there are two major shifts: a perceived horizontal shift from the Euro-Atlantic region to Asia-Pacific, and a vertical shift from the nation-state to a plethora of non-state partners. These trends are complex and should be assessed in relative terms. A shift away from the unipolar world of the immediate aftermath of the Cold War does not mean the United States will lose its preeminence. Rather, it will face a more pluralistic global order, where powers will increasingly assert their interests. Nor does the rise of non-state actors mean the diminution of the centrality of the nation-state. Yet states will face growing competition as the inexorable forces of globalization empowers non-state actors and global entities. Other shifts include the gradual restructuring in the framework of global governance. The formal institutions embodied in the UN framework are giving way to a host of informal bodies and ad hoc fora around issue-specific agendas. The informalization of international governance has created a dense web of global networks that will increasingly set the international agenda. A stark example is ICANN and how elusive internet governance is, and how passionate the debate about whether it should be actually governed has become. In parallel, a no less consequential social and demographic transformation is taking place. The rise of Asia's middle class will be the dominant driver of this trend. By 2030, Asia will host 64% of the global middle class and account for over 40% of the global middle class consumption. The environmental, economic, and resource implications of the rise in the living standards will be both profound and far-reaching. They could fuel an unprecedented surge in global demand for resources. Failure of global supply to keep up with this demand will result in a heightened state of resource rivalry. Energy, food, water, and raw materials will be addressed as national security issues, not simply those of consumption. Regionally, the Middle East today faces a situation of tremendous flux, unprecedented perhaps since the post-World War I era and the creation of the present-day region-state system. As an cumulative effect of the Arab revolutions, regional conflict, and weak governance in this region continues to take its toll on the cohesion of the nation-state. The region's politics are becoming increasingly sectarianized, and its political identities are defined in ethnic, religious, and even tribal terms. This in turn has a profound impact on the region's conflicts. They are no longer simply framed as being between nation-states, but between Sunni and Shia, Muslim and Christian, Kurd or Persian against Arab. Indeed, the Arab-Israeli conflict itself, even that, is not immune from this trend. While conflicts between states are susceptible to negotiated solutions, conflicts based on primordial identity defy compromise and become increasingly intractable. In parallel, we are witnessing a trend towards increasing regional fragmentation. Weak state structures succumb to the pressures of resource scarcity, poor governance, and persistent conflict. This is particularly acute in Egypt's immediate vicinity. This fragmentation, in turn, provides for an enabling environment for transnational threats, such as smuggling and violent extremism, which thrive in the ungoverned spaces produced by weak and collapsing state structures. The threat of terrorism is proven to be particularly severe, as the locus of beheading terror groups moves away from Central Asia in the wake of sustained military assaults by the United States. It has found a ready home in our own region. Terrorism has once again become regionalized and is coalescing around multiple fronts: Syria, North Africa, the Sahel, and Somalia. The militarization of the region continues apace. This trend precedes the Arab revolutions, but it is compounded now with creeping nuclearization of the Middle East as a result of the failure to seriously address the region's proliferation challenge for over the last 40 years. And finally, these numerous challenges will unfold against the region's own looming resource crisis. By 2050, the Middle East will witness a drop in the amount of water by more than half. And while the region still holds more than 50% of the world's oil reserves, it's projected to become more vulnerable to energy security risks, given that on average, regional economies are 60% more energy intensive than the economies of the OECD countries. Ladies and gentlemen, as I mentioned at the outset, all of those profound transformations will pose both great challenge and great opportunity for Egypt. To address the challenges and capitalize on the opportunities requires a fundamental restructuring of Egypt's foreign policy, combining elements of continuity and change. The global rebalancing of power will afford Egypt the opportunity to diversify its portfolio of strategic economic relationships. We will continue to maintain and indeed enhance, let me repeat again, and indeed enhance our strategic relationship with the United States and with Europe. But we will also look elsewhere, and I have been traveling for the last 6 months. We will seek to nurture our emerging strategic relationship with Russia, not only for mutual benefit, but to serve regional peace and security. Similarly, the changes underway in the regions and the framework of international institutions will require Egypt to become increasingly integrated into the emerging global networks that will assume a central role in addressing the challenges of global governance, alongside the formal institutions embodied by the UN. This must also be accompanied by an effort to revitalize international groupings of which Egypt is a member, or devise new groupings reflective of the interests of emerging markets. And as we embark on the task of rebuilding the country's economy, we will increasingly look east. The dynamic economies of Asia provide opportunities for Egypt in the fields of technology transfer, investment, integration into global production chains, and of course, export markets. However, whereas Egypt and indeed other countries of the region look east towards Asia, Asia will also be increasingly looking west towards the Middle East. No longer will the rising powers of Asia afford the luxury of continuing to remain aloof from our region's challenges, and that will bring in a new dimension, both for us and for them. Sooner or later, the region's security map will begin to change in a manner commensurate with the transformation already underway in its energy map. When this occurs, this will provide further opportunities for Egypt to leverage newfound security and economic relationships. As Egypt looks east, it must also look south. For too long, we have allowed our relationship with Africa to atrophy. We cannot afford to allow the state of affairs to continue. Whereas Egypt cannot forfeit its rightful place in Africa, Africa cannot ignore the reality that Egypt is an integral part of this continent. New economic opportunities can provide the basis for a renewed partnership. Egypt's reintegration into the African fold will once again reinstate its historic role as a leader addressing the continent's manifold challenges in the realm of peace and security, conflict resolution, development assistance, and technical expertise. Egypt's immediate neighbors, Libya and Sudan, and by extension the Sahel, will always top our priorities. We are under no illusions that this was a responsibility that Egypt can assume alone, which is why we will look to partner with others to work for the benefit of the region. But we will seek to lead international and regional efforts in this regard, out of a sense of mutual interest in rehabilitating a region critical to our own national interests. In all of this, ladies and gentlemen, Egypt cannot afford to turn away from the historic conflicts of the Middle East. The issues of Gulf security, Lebanon, regional proliferation, and of course, the Arab-Israeli conflict have long been the focus of Egypt's diplomacy. To these, we must now add the civil war in Syria, the implications of the Kurdish issue, and the overarching Sunni-Shia divide, all of which are inextricably linked to Egypt's national security. Here again, we will seek to reclaim our influencing role, and not only as an arbiter of the region's conflicts and multiple security challenges, and as Egypt becomes more the intellectual beacon of the Arab world and of the region as a whole, it is uniquely placed to assume its responsibility, to confront those conflicts which increasingly assume sectarian and religious overtones. And this must be done boldly, with courage, and with candidness. For Egypt will divide its regional diplomacy neither on the basis of narrow sectarian interests, nor the politicization of religion. Rather, it will seek to project its role based on the political model founded on the values of a civil state that is inclusive of all of its citizens, irrespective of gender, race, or creed. Egypt will not stand in opposition to those who adopt different forms of governance or different ideologies. However, we will stand, and we will do this, and we will stand firmly against those who seek to undermine our revolution or challenge our sovereignty. Egypt's relations will have concrete, short, and medium-term objectives within the context of a strategic vision for the country and the regions it is associated with. Our policies will thus be guided by long-term national interests, by the long-term national interest of a nation-state that is internationalist in conviction. Ladies and gentlemen, much of what I've highlighted in the course of my remarks tonight requires deeper discussion. And I look forward to engaging with you and others at the American University of Cairo on these issues and to see what we can offer by way of how to move things forward. However, I'd like to conclude with a few words about those who are charged with the actual conduct of Egypt's foreign policy. For we often talk about Egypt's diplomacy without recognizing its diplomats, and we debate the future of Egypt's foreign policy without mentioning the venerable institution responsible for its formulation and its conduct, the Egyptian Foreign Ministry. We need only consider the challenging agenda I have laid out in my remarks to realize that much will be expected of Egypt's future diplomats. Increasingly, our diplomats will be required to combine several different skill sets. They will need to adopt and internalize the discourse of globalization necessary for Egypt to integrate into the emerging global networks. At the same time, they will also have to be able to navigate the hard realities of geopolitics, geoeconomics, and regional conflicts in the pursuit of Egypt's interests. Furthermore, given the complexity of international and regional politics, their analytical and research skills will be a critical requirement, in addition to the core skill set of negotiations and diplomatic representation. Egypt's foreign ministry as an institution will also be required to assume multiple roles: the interlocking nature of domestic and foreign policy will require that the foreign minister assume a leading role in strategic policy planning. This, in turn, will mandate a more in-depth interaction with other ministries and agencies that are themselves stakeholders in Egypt's external relations, given the increased diversity of our interests abroad. Equally important will be the need to engage with domestic constituencies to garner political support for Egypt's foreign policy. I frequently joke, or I have to admit half-heartedly, that there are about 85 million Egyptians and about 95 million Egyptian foreign ministers. But I'm much more happy with the attention and for people to be bored with what we're doing. The need to regain Egypt's role internationally and regionally does not come without a cost, whether in terms of expenditure, resources, or political will. Just as in the case with any public policy, in a context of democratic politics, we will have to explain to Egyptians why any foreign policy decision or course of action justifies the cost that he or she must bear for the sake of national interest. Furthermore, we must seek to build a constituency in support of that national interest. Such matters can no longer be decided by policymakers with the best of their intentions, in isolation from popular demand and interest of your constituencies. In closing, therefore, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to take this opportunity to give special recognition to our diplomats, whether those currently serving or those who will continue to serve in various capacities in the years to come. But most of all, I would like to acknowledge the service of every generation of Egypt's diplomatic corps. Many of you here, familiar with senior ambassadors, who occupy the leading positions in the ministry and our embassies, but it is the upcoming generation of diplomats that will carry the responsibility in the increasingly complex political environment I have attempted to explain. I have had the great privilege to head the foreign ministry after a lifetime of service in Egypt's diplomacy. It comes at a time of ominous but historic responsibility. However, the greater privilege has been to work with this new generation, to which I would like to extend special recognition. To them, the future holds great promise, but also comes with it great responsibility. For the challenges they face will far exceed those of our generation. In preparation for them, I highly recommend that they pursue a master's degree at the School of Global Affairs and Public Policy.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you very much.